Welcome to Urban Legends, and in tonight's video, we're heading back to 1983, where the quiet hills of Exmoor were shaken by a mysterious and brutal predator that killed so much livestock that the SAS were deployed to eliminate it. This is the story of the 1983 Exmoor Beast mystery. In the early 1980s, Exmoor was a quiet and remote region of the English countryside, defined by rolling hills, dense woodland, and farmland that stretched for miles with very little in the way of major roads or urban centers. The communities there were small and closely knit, with generations of families raising sheep, cattle, and other livestock, living a life that depended on the land and the animals that sustained them. It was in this peaceful and isolated setting that a wave of unusual events began to disturb the calm, as farmers started to discover their animals had been killed in ways that were brutal and inexplicable, often leaving their sheep and lambs mauled in the fields with no clear sign of what could have done it. Soon after these livestock killings began to attract attention, reports of strange sightings emerged from the local population, describing a large cat-like creature moving through the hills and wooded areas, always elusive, and always just beyond reach, leaving a trail of fear and speculation that would soon capture the attention of the wider public. As the months wore on, the stories of strange killings and fleeting glimpses of a shadowy animal began to settle into something that people could no longer laugh off. Farmers, who at first treated the talk of a big cat as little more than gossip, were now facing the loss of livestock with wounds that didn't fit the familiar patterns of dogs or foxes, and with every new carcass found their skepticism gave way to unease. The moors themselves, usually seen as open, empty, and safe, began to feel different. There was a growing sense that the wide stretches of grass and heather might be hiding something powerful and predatory. Even the simple routines of daily life shifted. Parents grew more protective of their children, locals avoided walking alone after dusk, and those who worked the land often carried a rifle or kept one close, just in case. The local papers fed the mood, stitching together scattered accounts into a narrative that seemed to grow bigger with each headline, and soon the so-called Exmoor Beast was no longer just a rumor passed from neighbor to neighbor, but a story carried across the country. By early 1983, what had once been idle speculation had hardened into a genuine fear, and the question that hung over the moor was not whether something was out there, but how much longer it could remain unchecked. Eventually, the police decided to take action. They could not admit publicly that they were bringing in the military to deal with what might be an escaped wild animal, but behind closed doors that is exactly what they did, and they asked the Special Air Service, the SAS, to handle it. The SAS at that time had men who were just back from operations abroad, soldiers who had learned to track enemies across jungles, deserts, and mountains, and they were used to working silently in difficult terrain. Exmoor, with its steep valleys, patches of woodland, and wide stretches of open ground, was in many ways the perfect training environment, and the fact that it was supposedly home to a large and dangerous predator only made the mission more urgent. The soldiers arrived quietly, with no announcement and no uniform insignia, and they set up in the hills like they were preparing for a covert military exercise. For weeks they carried out night patrols with infrared scopes, lying up in the long grass and waiting with rifles trained on the open ground, moving at dawn and dusk when the beast was said to hunt, and leaving no sign of their presence behind. Farmers would sometimes see torchlight flashing briefly on a distant ridge or hear the rumble of a Land Rover engine on a back road late at night, but officially nothing was happening and the police denied that any operation was underway. The truth was that some of the most highly trained soldiers in the world were combing the moor, using the same patience and precision that they would normally employ against terrorists or enemy fighters. Stories from people who claimed to have spoken to the men afterwards suggest that they did in fact see the beast. One account describes a soldier watching a large cat-like shape moving low across the grass on a moonlit night, too big to be a dog, too sleek to be anything other than a predator built for hunting. Another story tells of claw marks found on a tree trunk high off the ground, the kind of marks no native animal in Britain could have left. The men had the beast in their sights more than once, and yet they never took the shot. The explanation, depending on who you believe, was that they had been given strict orders not to kill it unless it threatened a human being directly. Some say this was because the government feared the public backlash if it came out that big cats were roaming the countryside. Others suggest that the Ministry of Defense decided the animal was a curiosity, but not a danger, and that there was no reason to risk bad publicity by shooting it and displaying the body. Whatever the case, the SAS completed their operation, handed back their reports, and withdrew just as quietly as they had arrived, leaving the mystery unsolved and the legend stronger than ever. Reports of big cats roaming the British countryside have circulated for decades, and while Devon and Cornwall tend to attract much of the attention, many other counties also have long traditions of sightings and stories. Gloucestershire, for example, has seen repeated claims of a mysterious panther-like animal stalking the Cotswolds, with farmers reporting livestock killed in ways not typical of foxes or dogs. In 2012, walkers near Nailsworth described seeing a large black cat crossing a field in broad daylight, and the local press carried accounts of sheep found with unusual injuries. The rolling hills and thick woodland of the Cotswolds provide plenty of cover for a shy predator, and this has only added weight to the idea that something unusual might be living there. Wales has also produced some of the most striking accounts, especially in Powys and Monmouthshire, where residents have spoken of jet black cats the size of Labradors moving silently along hedgerows. One of the most talked about cases came in 1980 near Llanidloes, when police were called after repeated reports of a panther watching from the trees. Officers did not capture anything, but the consistency of the descriptions and the fact that sightings came from different people in different places gave the story unusual credibility. The rugged uplands and remote valleys of mid-Wales are often pointed to as perfect terrain for a large animal to go unseen for long periods of time. Further north, Yorkshire has a steady history of encounters, especially on the fringes of the North York moors. Walkers and gamekeepers have spoken of tawny or black cats moving quickly across open ground before vanishing into cover. In the early 2000s, the so-called Beast of Bolton Abbey became well known after several separate sightings of a muscular cat with a long tail in Wharfdale. Farmers later found claw marks on trees in the area, which were larger than those normally made by dogs or native wildlife. The mix of moors and farmland has made Yorkshire one of the hotspots often mentioned in discussions about Britain's mystery cats. Scotland has contributed its share of legends and alleged encounters. The Highlands, with their vast forests and mountains, provide the most obvious setting, but lowland regions have seen claims as well. The so-called Beast of Buchan in Aberdeenshire is one of the better known, with multiple accounts of a black leopard-like cat from the 1990s onwards. In Fife, in 2005, a police officer even reported seeing a large black cat while driving near Kirkcaldy, an account that attracted serious attention precisely because of the witness's profession. It is believed that every county in the UK has a population of big cats, but the question is, where did they come from? In the 1960s and early 70s, it was shockingly easy for people in Britain to buy exotic animals. If you had the money, then you could pick up a lion cub, a leopard, or even a cheetah from certain pet shops or from ads in specialist magazines, with no real checks on you, or whether you had the space or the knowledge to look after them. At first these cubs seemed like unusual and glamorous pets, but they grew quickly into powerful and unpredictable predators, and most private owners had little idea how to cope with them. The Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976 was brought in to stop this. It forced anyone who wanted to keep a big cat or other dangerous creature to apply for a license from the council, to build enclosures that met strict safety rules, and to pay high fees for insurance and inspections. The law was meant to protect both the public and the animals, but for many owners it created a real problem. They suddenly faced costs and restrictions they could not meet, and zoos and sanctuaries were already overloaded. Some owners were unwilling to have their animals destroyed, and over the years a number of people have gone on record admitting that they quietly released their big cats into the countryside, rather than give them up. Reports of large paw prints, sheep and deer killed in unusual ways, and fleeting glimpses of cat-like shapes in fields and woodland have continued ever since. Big cats are survivors. They are skilled hunters that can live on deer, rabbits, and other prey while avoiding people. Among them, leopards are one of the most adaptable animals on Earth, living in the scorching heat of Africa and India, but also thriving in colder parts of Asia. They were once indigenous to Britain thousands of years ago, which makes the idea of them slipping back into our landscape feel strangely fitting. With their adaptability and the shelter that the British countryside provides, it is not impossible that leopards, and perhaps other cats too, have bred and established small hidden populations in the UK.